Hello and welcome to Coop's Corner. I'm your host, Cooper Petagna, and today we have a very special guest to help us put in perspective all the chaos that is going on in college football. That is none other than John Talty of CBS Sports, one of the best college football insiders there is, and one of the best to talk to when you're trying to get an idea who your team might be hiring next. And John, another day, another coach down. There's 12 openings now in the FBS. Hugh Freeze is one of those guys that is now going to be looking for a new opportunity elsewhere after Auburn makes a move. And I don't blame him, right? You think of what Hugh Freeze accomplished or did not accomplish there. And then after a loss against Kentucky, it's done on the plains, man. So, John, welcome in. And I guess I have to ask you first, what will you remember from the Hugh Freeze era at Auburn?
They were close, right? Is that they were this
So
close?
close.
I mean,
So close.
and in some ways they were. But I will think back to, having covered that program for a while. The guy before him, Brian Harsin, very outside the box, not a guy that anybody wanted, and so they went very inside the box. Hugh Freeze is a guy that you thought would fit that culture, that program. They had their big money people aligned behind Hugh Freeze. I think they gave him pretty much everything he needed to be successful, and he just didn't get it done. He was not good enough in this current environment to win. And so sometimes, Coop, like, we'll talk about programs that, like, they didn't have the right resources, they have all these issues. I think he had everything he needed to be good. He's just not a good enough coach. That's where I kind of fall on it. He made the wrong decisions on players.
Were you surprised by the outcome here? Because for me, I was just how well they recruited, how well they did in the state of Alabama. The one lingering question I had was the quarterback position, and it seemed like the anchor that dragged Hugh Freeze and Auburn down was this offseason where they made that very criticized decision to tie pretty much everything to Jackson Arnold, and here we are. I mean, to me, that's kind of to simplify it as much as I can. There's a lot of things that have gone wrong, but I look at the quarterback position and say, all right, when you had to have it, you didn't go out there and get the guy that maybe could have changed your fortunes for you.
Yeah, well, and think about it. You go back a year before that, and there are people within that program that wanted them to be aggressive about getting a portal QB, and instead, Hugh Freeze said, "I believe in Peyton Thorne," and he doubled down on Peyton Thorne, and we realized within like a week or two that was not the right decision. And there are people within his program that, like, let's be aggressive on trying to get Cam Ward or some of the other options that were out there, and they were not decisive about doing so. They got in very, very late on Cam Ward, where he was already at that point, I think, going to Miami. But I think between Thorne and then, as you talked about, I mean, I remember hearing from people throughout the industry when they went with Jackson Arnold that were almost shocked that in a make or break year where you had the money to go out and get who you wanted for the most part, that you would bet it all on Jackson Arnold. And watching that game against Kentucky last night, seeing the Toronto Blue Jays and Dodgers score more runs than Auburn did points yesterday against Kentucky. It's like, this says it all. Like, their offense was not good enough. Hugh Freeze was an offensive guy. And when you made the wrong decision at QB, when you're supposed to be a QB guru, when your offense looks terrible in many ways, when you're supposed to be an offensive guru, then there's no way for you to kind of push it off on anybody else. Like, the defense has been very good. DJ Durkin has done his job. The offense has been the problem, and that's Hugh Freeze's domain.
Do you have any insight on how they ultimately landed on Jackson Arnold?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think it's, I initially thought, and maybe you did too, I initially thought he might end up at Mississippi State. That was kind of the early buzz. Obviously, there's that connection to Jeff Lebby. I think they were interested in Jackson Arnold. So I was a little surprised that of all the QBs available that they went with Arnold. I think you can talk yourself into some of what he does, and I think I'd love if you could get a honest answer from Hugh Freeze if how Arnold looked in their Oklahoma's win over Alabama, if that played a role, because that was probably the highlight of Jackson Arnold's season last year in some ways, where you could see him being effective and running the ball against Bama. If maybe that played a role, maybe just some recency bias for him of like, I got to beat Alabama. Let's get a guy who can beat Alabama. And it just obviously did not work out the way that they hoped.
All right, so Auburn 15-19 in 3 years under Hugh Freeze, 6-16 in the SEC, 2-9 at home. That's not good enough. So Auburn makes a move. They become the fourth team in the SEC now with a head coaching vacancy. The other three, you have Arkansas, you have LSU, and you have Florida. Right? In your time covering the sport, can you ever remember a time, not only in the SEC but in college football, that you've had this many high-profile jobs available?
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, the closest that comes to mind for me, I guess, 2021, and some of that was more of a domino effect, and that's something that we're not even talking about yet. Like, we're just thinking about the jobs that are open on November 2nd. Like, if, for instance, we'll just do a hypothetical here, if LSU hires like a Lane Kiffin, for instance, that opens up Ole Miss, and then Ole Miss is going to grab somebody. And so that's like sometimes what gets the carousel really going crazy. So we haven't even had that yet. Like, if we see some of these big coach steals, which I'm sure we'll get into some of it. We know programs are going to try to do that. That will just get this thing going even crazier. But from a high profile standpoint, I mean, you think about, to me, LSU is clearly a top 10 job. I think Florida is clearly a top 10 job. I would have Penn State maybe in the 10 to 15 range, and you could have Auburn top 15 to 20. We can get into the specifics, but to have four premier jobs where you can legitimately win a national championship open with still a month left in the season, to me, is unprecedented.
Have you gotten some feedback on Auburn just in terms of like what I find fascinating is between these four SEC schools, right? And you have to balance the short term and the long term vision, and things can turn over very quickly with the transfer portal in terms of players coming and going. But you look at Auburn and you look at what they have at the receiver position. You look at what they have collectively at every level of their defense. It is a lot of young talent that has accumulated a lot of experience over the last 2 years under DJ Durkin and Hugh Freeze. And there's a lot of like building blocks there that I think a lot of coaches would be attracted to. I wonder if that makes them maybe a little bit more attractive in the coaching search. Have you heard anything along that line?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of potential there, and I think the best case scenario to it, I think, could be what we've seen with Texas A&M, where there was a lot of talent on that roster, and Jimbo Fisher, there are a lot of issues there, right? You could say there was not the stability, there was not the discipline. There were a number of different things where we felt like they were not maximizing the talent on the roster. You bring in a guy like Mike Elko, who's a more serious guy, a more disciplined, hard nosed coach, and now they're a top three team in the country. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen at Auburn, but I think if you look at how Hugh Freeze has underachieved relative to the talent, if you can, for instance, retain a Cam Coleman, if you can keep some of those other guys on the roster, knowing that there'll be plenty of vultures trying to get that guy given what his talent is, if you can keep him and get the right guy at QB, maybe you think that's Deuce Knight, who's already on the roster. Maybe it's bringing someone with you, whatever that might be. I think that that's a roster that can be significantly improved just by being more disciplined and having better coaching, honestly. I mean, that feels like this should have been an 8-9 win team this year. So if you just have some better coaching, better QB, and maybe a stronger internal culture around the program, I think you could take a leap really easily. And so to me, I think that would be very attractive. And I think it will be very attractive to coaches, knowing that this is not a complete rebuild. If you can maintain some of that talent base that's there, and I think Auburn has the resources to do that from my understanding, I think you can see a quick jump, which would be attractive, especially for some of the, kind of the up and coming candidates that are out there right now.
Well, let's talk about a couple of those guys, and I'll let you kind of go through them. But the guy at the top of the list seems to be Tulane head coach John Summerall, guy that is from Alabama, whose wife went to Auburn, from what I understand. He's got a lot of connections to the state, and he kind of fits that blue-collar mentality. To me, the first thing that kind of comes up in terms of what you were talking about from a level of continuity standpoint, when you have a group of five head coach and you're taking a chance on a guy being a first-time Power 4 head coach, it's like, hey, we have DJ Durkin here, a guy that's also been a head coach, and a guy that's been leading one of the better units in the country. You have that continuity that you can really kind of build around there. What are you really kind of hearing about John Summerall, the fit here? And are there any like dates for the casual college football fan that they need to keep in mind in terms of signing day, conference championships, how these things move?
Yeah, I mean, Summerall to me is the early buzzy candidate. It makes a lot of sense. Even before Hugh Freeze got fired, that was the name that I was hearing the most from just some different Auburn boosters and people that I talked to. It makes sense, right? And I think John is going to have a lot of options potentially this cycle. Was talking to someone earlier today that I think you can put him in two buckets maybe. Like you have the overall kind of bell of the ball, as I refer to it, and that's like Lane Kiffin. Like Lane Kiffin's going to be able to go where he wants to go. I think in the G6 ranks, and there's a lot of really good coaches there, that's John Summerall. He's going to be the one most likely to get the top P4 type job from the G6 jump. So I think that is it. He's in a great position. The other thing that is interesting, though, Coop, especially when we think about these bigger jobs, and I was thinking about this with Matt Rule before he ended up re-upping, is like you got to have some momentum down the stretch, especially if you're going to make a jump. And so, Tulane loses to UTSA the other day. They've got a tough game coming up against Memphis. Like they've got some tough games, and like he's the hot guy right now. But if you lose 2-3 down the stretch, you lose some of that buzz, and then it gets a little harder for an 80 to sell you as here's the guy that's going to fix everything who lost 4 games in the American or whatever it might be. So that's something that you have to keep in mind, I think, with some of these guys, including Summerall. But he certainly has a great reputation, did very well at Troy, which was not the easiest place to win. He's done very well at Tulane, and I think people expect him to be able to make that jump. To the other point you were making, yeah, I mean, you've got 2 key periods, I think, to think about. You've got the early signing period, which is obviously the very beginning of December. And then you've also got the transfer portal window, which is moved to starting January 2nd. It's only one window now, as you know, Cooper. And I think depending on the guy that you want, if, for instance, Tulane makes the playoff, things start getting complicated. And so in some ways, Tulane losing to UTSA might help him. If he can keep winning and maybe just miss the playoff cut, you can get him early December and have him in place in time to at least get some of the early signing period action going, and then also being able to have your full operation ready for the transfer portal window. If you wait, if he makes the playoff, wins a game or two, then it starts getting a little bit more complicated. And that's really the big question, I think, hanging over all of this coaching carousel season is any program willing to wait on a guy who makes the playoff? You hear mixed things. I hear more skepticism than expectation there, but if a ton of the top candidates make the playoff, like that either leaves your pool very limited or you're going to have to risk waiting, which opens up other kind of questions there.
Right. That's extremely tough because signing day is on the 3rd, I believe, of December, right?
Yeah.
First week. And then you have conference championships on December 6th. That certainly factors in for a guy like Lane Kiffin, who we'll get to in a little bit. But I do want to kind of stick on Auburn here. Outside of Summerall, I know it's very early. Nathan King does a phenomenal job at Auburn Undercover at 247sports.com. Some other names that have come up, and one that I think is really kind of the first secondary option for a lot of searches, maybe like Florida, maybe like Auburn, correct me if I'm wrong, but Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri. I'm really curious to kind of get your pulse on where he is, because to me, he kind of fits into that category of like a Matt Rule, where it's like, okay, maybe it just makes sense to stick at Missouri in terms of how I built this place, the resources that I have invested. Is it going to be better, or is it going to be worth the risk for me to go to a Florida or for an LSU where you have that pressure and those expectations year in and year out? Where at this pace, I've said it before, I mean, he's on the timeline of having a statue built of him in Columbia, Missouri right now. What are you hearing about Eli Drinkwitz and maybe his interest in some of these other jobs in the SEC?
Yeah, I think you nailed it there. And I think they have had maybe one of the best NIL situations out of anyone in some ways in college football. I mean, they've been aggressive early, and they've been able to find some ways to get some NIL money the way that other programs in other states did not before Missouri had it going. So he's had a very good situation there. Obviously has quite a bit of job security. I think that there's different things that every candidate, including Drinkwitz, has to think about. And I think the 2 biggest things are, one, what's my job security right now versus where I might be going? And of course, with Florida, LSU, Auburn, I mean, they're all making moves on their coaches within 3 or so years, 4 years. So, if you don't win, you're not getting a long runway. That's just the reality of the situation. There's other programs that might give you a little bit more. I think the other part, and this is what's going to be the most interesting thing, I think, in a lot of ways, with whether it's Drinkwitz, Kiffin, others, do I feel like I've hit my ceiling at the program I'm at or do I feel like I can keep building? Because if I can at Missouri make a lot of money, which he is and will continue to do, have a lot of job security, pretty much get what I want. I have a good relationship with my AD, and I feel like I haven't tapped out. I haven't hit my ceiling, that I still can keep winning. I can take Missouri to the playoff, whatever it might be. Then I think there's a lot of reason to stay. If you feel like, you know what, I've done everything I could, the best I'm going to be able to do at Missouri is 8, 9 wins or 10 wins and miss the playoff, whatever it might be. Then I think you have to think more seriously about taking a leap. So that's something he's going to have to weigh. He is a name that comes up a lot in searches. I do feel like, trying to think how to put this. He does not feel like he won't move. I'll say that. Like, I think there's some coaches that you feel like this guy's not going to move this cycle. I don't think that I get that vibe from talking to people around him. I think he would listen, but he's in such a good position that he certainly does not have to jump just to jump. And I think there's going to be at least a program or two this cycle that's going to think, oh, well, of course we can steal a coach from that school. And then that guy's going to be like, actually, I'm good where I'm at and I'm not going. And there's just going to be, with 4 of these premier jobs already open, someone's going to run into some trouble. I just feel like there's just too many big jobs open, wanting the same candidates for that not to happen at this point.
I mean, I tweeted it last night, right? And here's where it gets really interesting now that you have Auburn on the board looking for a head coach. And obviously they have interest in John Summerall. But if LSU takes a swing at Lane Kiffin and they don't get him, which is very plausible given the fact that it looks like Ole Miss is going to make the college football playoffs, and it goes back to your point about, all right, the timeline of this, then you have a very combustible situation in Baton Rouge where there's not a school president, even though it seems like they're going to have one this week. There's not an AD in place, even though that search will happen soon after they find the head football coach. And I get it. There's an associate AD with Verge Osbury. He's got a committee. But there's a lot of people with their hands in the cookie jar, and ultimately you don't know who's making that decision. So to your point, there's only one belle of the ball this cycle, and it's really Lane Kiffin. Outside of that, the next attractive name, at least within this SEC footprint, is John Summerall. So if you're an LSU and you miss out on Kiffin and Auburn moves hypothetically very quickly on a guy like Summerall, like where does this go? Do you even have any pulse on the direction of what LSU might be thinking at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where it gets really tricky. I think you can put Florida in a similar boat where we see Lane as the top guy there, but if you miss on Lane, where do you go? And I think that's where you have that secondary where it's a Drinkwitz. Jeff Brom's name has been mentioned with both Florida and Penn State. Clark Lee's name has been mentioned. Brent Key at Georgia Tech. I mean, you have these kind of secondary candidates that could make sense. I think you have your big swings, like everyone loves Marcus Freeman, right? Marcus Freeman's great. I don't think Marcus Freeman is leaving Notre Dame, but I think if you're an LSU, which is, they almost thought they had him once as a defensive coordinator. He was coming to work for Ed O, and then, last minute switch and he goes to Notre Dame instead. But if you're LSU, do you kick the tires on Marcus Freeman? I'm sure you do. But do I think he is going to LSU in this moment? No. So I think that's where you feel some people out. But I do think that there's not enough surefire, clear-cut coaching candidates that you're going to feel like as a fan base, wow, I'm so fired up. And I think it's specifically with LSU and Florida. If you miss on Lane Kiffin, if you miss on a Marcus Freeman type, I don't think Ryan Day is going to any of those programs. So it's like, where are you getting that hot name that makes everybody feel great about it? I just don't really see it. I mean, I think Kenny Dillingham is an incredible coach. Dillingham's name is already coming up in searches. Could he have success in those places? Absolutely. I think he's a lunatic in the best way. I think he would not be scared about the SEC intensity in one iota. He's been at Auburn before. I think his name will come up with Auburn. But I mean, LSU better than anybody, Coop. Is the LSU fan base going wild for Kenny? I don't. Probably not. Now, if he wins, they will. But right off the bat, I don't know that they are.
Yeah, I just think we're in a different era of college football, and I've said it on the show before. This era of going and grabbing the hottest coach off the shelf might die with Lane Kiffin. If he makes a move, that might be one of the last times we ever see that, where we see one of these prize coaches like a Lane Kiffin, move off the chessboard in the prime of his career at 50 years old, right? In the midst of a playoff run with with Ole Miss because in reality, I can see Drink staying. He's in a really good
Yeah,
situation, right? In reality, I could see Jeff Brom staying at Louisville where he played. I could see Brent Key staying at Georgia Tech where he played. I could see Clark Lee staying at Vandy where he played. So it's not just the primary options, it's the secondary options, right? And then all of a sudden you run into something where a lot of these teams are in foreign territory. Auburn's in foreign territory, LSU, Florida, you can all put them in the same bucket. And administratively, I find it fascinating because this thought exercise is like, all right, take all the primary options off the board. Now you have to put on your thinking cap and you really have to dig. Almost kind of like not to the level that A&M, it's not the best example, but maybe a little bit of A&M got put in this position where, correct me if I'm wrong, financially coming off the Jimbo contract, they really kind of had to not think outside the box, but they had to be logical, right? They had to be really kind of pointed and intentional with what they were doing. So they got a guy that was a familiar face that had done a good job, that was still cutting his teeth and showed some developmental upside in Mike Elko, and it's paid off in a big way. And I just
for sure.
wonder in this day and age of college football, like we look at these CEOs and I just wonder, like, are the CEOs a dying breed? Is James Franklin a dying breed? Is Brian Kelly a dying breed? Are the guys that you gravitate to are these play callers? And the other part about this is how many of these guys that are up for being hired this time around, the Brent Keys of the world, the Kenny Dillinghams of the world. You can continue to go on and look at some of these names. Were first time head coaches. Arizona State
Right.
was a first time head coaching opportunity for Kenny Dillingham. Brent Key, the same thing at Georgia Tech. And for whatever reason, I mean, I understand the reason, but there's like this resistance to that thought exercise for an LSU or a Florida or an Auburn, and it's like, well, we can't afford to do that. That's what I would imagine the pushback would be, and it's like, what do you mean you can't afford it? Because you missed on Hugh Freeze, you missed on Brian Harsin, you missed on Brian Kelly, and you missed on what you thought was the next best thing out of the G6 and Billy Napier, right? So I just wonder why aren't we hearing a little bit more from Will Stein or Ryan Grubb or some of these play callers in a day and age of college football where maybe you can shrink things responsibly from a contract standpoint? There doesn't have to be X amount of money guaranteed up front. And it's more, not the contract itself, but it's more incentive based on a guy that says, hey, there's some traits here that we like. But then again, if it doesn't work out, we had the wiggle room to kind of get out of it, and there's not an egg on our face. I just don't really understand why it's not there yet. Everybody's kind of swinging. I got to hit a triple. I got to hit a home run. It's like people are allergic to just getting on base. You know,
Right.
I don't really understand it. So I don't know.
Well, I
Correct me
mean,
if
think
I'm wrong,
about
but that's
this.
kind of where I see it going.
Yeah, well, I mean, look at some of the top programs right now. Like Ohio State, Ryan Day, first time head coach. Georgia, Kirby Smart, first time head coach when he got that job.
Dan
Oregon,
Lanning.
Dan Lanning, first time head coach. I mean, so it's been a successful model, and you named a bunch of other guys, but you're right. It's like some of these programs feel like I have to steal a sitting Power Four head coach. And I think like you're already hearing that out of some of these searches where it's like Penn State, LSU, Florida, like we want a sitting head coach who can win a national championship. It's like, okay, how many of those guys exist? Like, where's that list? There's not many. And I think back to, we were talking a lot about Auburn earlier, like when Auburn had their most recent search, and some of these things can get wild. Some of them are very straightforward. And I remember even before they fired Brian Harsin, but as soon as it happened, you talk to different people around the program, and they're like, we want either Lane Kiffin or Hugh Freeze. And guess what? Those were the two guys that they almost had Lane Kiffin up until the last minute, and then they hired Hugh Freeze. It was as straightforward as it got, and it made very sense. Like, yeah, we're going to take one or the other, and that'll be our guy. You're not really hearing that this time around. Now there's a lot of Lane Kiffin talk again, but beyond that, there's not we're going to pick out of one of these three guys and we'll get one of them because, of course, they'll say yes. I think there's a lot more in question. And from Matt Rule staying at Nebraska, Kurt Signetti staying at Indiana, Rhett Lashley staying at SMU, all these guys who you would have thought 5 years ago, a decade ago, of course we could coach Steele from Indiana. Of course we could coach Steele from SMU. Now you can't. Now Rhett Lashley can make top 10 money at SMU. I mean, that's where it is, and I think the one of the biggest carrots was we'll give you more money. But Lane Kiffin's already making $9 million at Ole Miss. He can easily make $12 million with the next kind of extension and raise. So you can't really dangle money. You can dangle a path to a national championship maybe easier, but Ole Miss is already likely going to make the playoff. And so it just gets, I think, challenging. And I do think they're going to have to think outside the box. Everybody right now, ADs, people like that I talk to, everybody wants the next Kurt Signetti. That's one of the hot things. But how many programs actually have the guts to do it? I mean, that was not necessarily the sexiest hire for Indiana. I think it helped that it was Indiana. They're like, yeah, let's take a shot on this 60-something-year-old guy who's won everywhere he's been, but he's never won at the highest level. Like, does a LSU, are they willing to do that? Because here's, for instance, I think Willie Fritz is a hell of a coach. I think he's having a hell of a year at Houston. Like, you want to find the next Kurt Signetti? I think Willie Fritz fits a lot of those kind of things. He's had success in the state of Louisiana at Tulane. He almost got the Georgia Tech job a couple years ago, and similar situation to kind of what we're talking about now. He wanted to wait until after his conference championship game, and they didn't want to wait, and so he missed out. But, like, if you want the next Signetti, he is one of those guys I'd put in that bucket. But is a Florida going to do that? Is an LSU going to do that? That's where I think it gets tough because they want that sexy hire. They want Kurt Signetti's results without taking the process to get a Kurt Signetti.
You said the magic P word, process. And I feel like when it comes to these big SEC schools, they lack process. It's almost kind of lazy. It's like, hey, let's throw a bunch of guaranteed money at the hottest name out there without really kind of thinking this through. And then we're on the hook for more buyout money 3 to 4 years down the line. That's the exact situation that Auburn finds themselves in right now. Logically, I could understand where Florida and LSU made the hires with Brian Kelly and Billy Napier. But I do kind of want to talk about Florida a little bit. I mean, just general baseline. What are you hearing about their search? Because I'm wondering, like, who's the first domino? Is it LSU, and then this thing can really kind of kick off for everybody else?
I think LSU and Florida are in the same Lane Kiffin sweepstakes at this point. I have a better sense of Florida. LSU is just a wild card right now for all the reasons that you described. Like, from my understanding, LSU is interested in Lane Kiffin, but there's a lot of cooks in that kitchen, as you said. It's the perfect way of describing it, which has the potential to get very weird in a coaching search. And so when you got a lot of moving pieces there, you just don't know. And I think the other thing is you have, and I actually don't necessarily disagree, as wild as some of the Louisiana governor's comments have been lately, the one thing that I actually don't think is that crazy is he's kind of hitting on what you were saying earlier. Like, let's do more of an incentivized contract where it's less base. Let's do more incentivized. I think that makes a lot of sense. And, like, now he's saying that. You also have, their interim AD, Verge Osbury, saying, like, I have the power to go out and get the best guy, and we're not going to be tied down by money or whatever it might be. So those are two competing ideas. If LSU wants to throw around $15 million, yeah, they'll get somebody great. If they're only saying we're only going to offer $5 million, and everything else is incentives, that takes you out of the running for certain guys. But I think LSU and Florida are the ones that, to me, they're the clear top two jobs in this cycle. I think that a lot of the candidates that you would put for Florida, you would put for LSU. And so the maneuvering ability there, I think, can be really interesting. Can you get a guy locked down? And I think one of the most fascinating things, again, it keeps coming back to Kiffin. Like, Kiffin is in the catbird seat. He can do what he wants. He can stay, he can leave. Everyone has to wait on what Lane Kiffin wants to do, which is an unbelievable thing to think about given where his career has been over the last decade. But for instance, say you're waiting. Does Florida decide, I don't want to wait anymore? I'm going to jump on that number 2 before LSU can get him. That's where you're going to have to see, I think, and Auburn has that potential. Maybe, hypothetically, Ole Miss and Florida both want Lane Kiffin, and Auburn says, why don't we just go all in on John Summerall right now? Get him locked in. Don't even let Florida or LSU even turn to John Summerall. Let's just go out and get him and be done. I think there is a school who can go out and do that. I think Auburn's one potential example of it. Maybe it's Arkansas. There's these different programs where I think if they can act decisively, go in and be aggressive for who is your top target, that might be option C for LSU, and don't even let them get down that far on their list and just take them off the board. That, to me, would be what I would try to do at one of those other schools. Because otherwise, if you're Arkansas, Virginia Tech, you don't want to just wait for LSU and Florida to go through their whole list until it gets to you. Like, I think you should try to get around him a little bit, knowing obviously at Arkansas you're not getting Lane Kiffin, so you don't have to worry about that. Just go to the guy that you think is next in line. That I think will be very, very interesting, and that's what's so fascinating about this search. You have all these different competing searches happening at the same time.
A lot of different variables that you have to sift through. Plus, it kind of puts a little bit of pressure on, obviously, LSU in Florida when it comes to Lane Kiffin, because you cannot force him into a decision. I mean, you're just kind of waiting on him, right, and the results of Ole Miss's season. So let's play it out, John. Hypothetically, I know typically when we talk to you guys insiders, you're always very good at maneuvering out and giving predictions. Not you. I know you will shoot me straight. But if you had to like play this out, and we can do confidence level if it makes you feel a little bit better, so you can come back and say, well, my confidence level was a 3 or a 2 or whatever it is. But
Yeah.
let's just kind of play this out. I mean, how do you see this kind of working out with Kiffin under the circumstance that Ole Miss will make the playoffs? Because as of right now, that's the most likely scenario. So where do you see this kind of going here over the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I think that the more Ole Miss wins, the easier it is for him to stay. And I think from talking to various people, the number one thing that I hear over and over again is it's about winning a national championship. Like, he's saying it publicly, he's also saying it privately. Like, it's not about the money. He already makes a lot of money. I do think he's happy in Oxford, but I don't think just the fact that he's happy in Oxford means he's staying there forever. Like, I think he wants to win. He wants to be supported by the fan base. I think he wants to be at a place where rain or shine, the fan base is there. And, sometimes there are questions about that with Ole Miss. And that's something to maybe keep an eye on down the stretch. I think what's so hard about Lane in particular is I don't think he knows what he's going to do right now. I truly believe that, because he's in a position where so much can happen. Like, if he runs the table and wins a national championship, he's obviously not leaving. Like, he's not going to do that. He could lose to Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl and decide, I got to get out of here. And so, like, it's almost impossible with him to predict anything, because this is a guy who all but took the Auburn job, and then his daughter famously told him, don't go, and he pulled back and stayed at Ole Miss. And so, like, he's like impossible to pin down on anything, which makes it hard for me to predict anything. But I think he will strongly consider every opportunity. I think it would be naive to think that he's not going to consider potentially going to a Florida or an LSU. But I also think it's naive to think that he automatically will take those jobs just because they're perceived as better jobs than Ole Miss. Like, I think he does have a very good thing going at Ole Miss. I think he has one of the best NIL minds in college football in Walker Jones. I think they've done a very good job at the Grove collection to get him in a position where he can be competitive year after year. So it's wait and see mode. And I think, again, that's what makes this cycle have so much chaos potential, is if you decide to wait on Lane, you might miss out on other guys. And here's the other thing that I was talking to some people about recently. Imagine the pressure that Lane Kiffin will feel if, say, January 1, he's playing in, I don't know, the Sugar Bowl or something in a quarterfinal, and Florida's still open. It's going to get hard for him to pretend like it's not a thing. So, like, if one of these big dog programs stays open and Lane's still coaching, it's going to be a circus. It's going to be people like me and you asking him over and over again, are you going to Florida? Are you going to LSU? Why is that job still open? Like, it will be hard for him to run away from the potential distractions of that. So that's what's going to be really tough for Lane to manage. I think he has done a good job of managing it so far, certainly better than he did a couple years ago with the Auburn situation. But if we get into the playoffs and Ole Miss is in the playoff and Florida and LSU are still out there open waiting on him, it's going to be very hard for him to have to deal with that day in and day out.
It's going to be very difficult for LSU or Florida or any team to go into the transfer portal window, which is January 2nd, without a head coach. Right,
Correct.
because then it just becomes roster defense, and you don't even have a pitch while your guys are in restricted free agency.
Well, and think about this. Somebody who's been involved in a lot of coaching searches and hires in the past was telling me this recently, which I thought was kind of interesting. He's like, think about like how it used to be. Like, you would typically fire your guy at the end of the season, and that fan base is rabid, right? And they probably want a new guy hired by like the following Wednesday or whatever it is. Like people want immediacy. And it's like, it is so stressful inside a coaching search as an AD, as a search firm, as a deputy, whatever, for these high profile searches. And that was only a 3-day thing. Now imagine you're Scott Strickland. You've already had your coach open for a couple weeks now. You're LSU, you fired last week. You're going to wait from today's November 2nd. You're going to wait from now until January 2nd to hire a coach. And you got to hold off all your boosters and trustees and media. That's a long time to wait, and that is going to be very stressful. And that's also when you open yourself up to a lot of people getting in the mix. We've seen searches go off the rails when other people start getting in the mix, and the longer a search goes on, the more questions you face, and the harder it is to hold it off. And you hear different things. There's stories of a contract in the desk type thing where you can have a wink, wink, nudge, nudge agreement. The agents I've talked to are very skeptical that any coach playing for a national championship would do that. Now, maybe that's what can happen, but I am skeptical that any coach who still has a chance to win a national championship at his school would agree to any deal, knowing that, again, if you win it all, you're not leaving.
Yeah, I think a likely scenario is that Ole Miss goes into the playoffs. Lane kind of gets his answer that he can compete for a national championship. Auburn makes a quick move on Summerall, right? I'm just hypothesizing here. And then all hell breaks loose if you're an LSU or Florida fan, right? I mean, because there is no obvious answer, you know?
And no, I completely agree. And I think that's why, let's go back a few years, right? And I don't have a great name for you here. I can hypothesize about a couple, but let's think about just that 2021 cycle. I don't think any of us thought Lincoln Riley was movable, right? And they lose a game down the stretch they probably shouldn't have, and all of a sudden he is in the mix. I don't think any of us thought Brian Kelly was movable. I mean, they were playing in the playoff, and that year, even when he took the job to LSU, they still had a shot at making the playoff, which is kind of wild. So it's almost the inverse of what I was saying earlier about whether you hit your ceiling. Like, is there someone who's been at a place for a little while who maybe doesn't feel the love from the fan base? And so I hypothetical name, like, I'm not saying this is a guy who's movable. I actually believe that he is still happy where he's at. But hypothetically, if you're one of these jobs, do you kick the tires on Dabo at Clemson? Do you say, hey, fan base doesn't love you the way you used to. You're getting criticism left and right, but we've seen you win national championships. We think you can do it here. Why don't you leave? We'll give you some resources. Let's see how things work. Like, is there a guy out there who in our heads we think that guy's not going to leave, but deep down he's like, you know what? I'm kind of sick of being here. Maybe I need a fresh start. Maybe in 2 years from now, I'm getting run out of here. So maybe I should jump now before I get fired. That to me are the names that might be interesting to think about.
But to me, how many of those guys are out there, right? That aren't already locked down. Like you brought up Freeman. I think Freeman would be one of those guys. But if you were to go to the top situations in college football, right, just in terms of playoff positioning, you were to go to Ohio State or Ryan Day, seems very comfortable there. You would go to Kurt Cignetti at Indiana. We've heard Dan Lanning refute it multiple times that he's not interested going anywhere else. Mike Elko at Texas A&M. And then it's just this hodgepodge.
Elko is interesting,
right?
I think Elko is interesting. I think that's one
from
that I
a
would
Penn
keep an eye
State
on.
perspective.
Yeah, I think that, and I think that you kick the tires on him for sure. I think if I were making a pitch at Elko, and he's like, I think he's happy where he's at. He's going to make more money. Again, all those things that we talk about. He has, to me, I think the best team in the SEC right now. And so they're going to be in the playoff if they take care of business down the stretch. So he's in that same category to me as Kiffin and other guys. Like, if he does what he needs to, he's going to be in the playoff, so it's going to be hard to move him. But there has been a tremendous amount of instability from a Texas A&M administrative standpoint. They've gone through, I think, like 5 presidents in like 5 years or something crazy like that. Like, they've gone through quite a few different changes at that leadership level. And so can you sell you've heard this probably a million times, Coop, at places you've worked at, a better alignment, right? Of, we have a president in place, we have an AD in place, we've got the trustees in place, everyone is on board with this vision, versus a state like Texas where, kind of like Louisiana, the governor gets involved in Texas and they're stacking their board of trustees of people that they care about. And that's led to some changes there. So that to me is the thing that I would keep an eye on. Let me think about this. Like, what about if Lincoln Riley runs the table at USC this year and he gets some shine on his name again? Do you kick the tires on him? Do you see if Matt Campbell is finally ready to leave Ames? I mean, there's just some guys who have been places for a while that do you at least just see is it time to go for you at this point in a way that maybe they haven't been ready to in the past?
All right, guys, just a reminder, you're locked into Coop's Corner. You can find us on youtube.com/Coops Petag. Also, you can find me at Cooper Petagna on X, all other socials as well. In John Talty, who is our guest today at J Talty on X, college football insider for CBS Sports, doing a phenomenal job. If you don't follow him right now, I suggest you go do that, especially with 12 jobs open in college football. John, you mentioned Dabo Swinney. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it back up. Clemson's what, 3-5 right now? I mean, they're in foreign territory. They're coming off a very difficult loss to Duke. And it seems like every time I hear Dabo speak after a tough loss, he's making some type of remark hinting at his job status. It's kind of odd to me. It kind of seems like a insecurity that he has. And by the way, with all these coaches getting let go left and right, I understand how he could think that. But like, are we heading towards the inevitable here at Clemson? Because it just kind of seems like, how do these two go forward together and reboot? And what does it look like beyond 2025? Because in my mind, like this marriage is coming to an end, just in terms of the love is not there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's they're many years into the marriage, and that spark seems to be gone between the two of them. It is weird. I mean, Dabo's always good for some out there comments, but yeah, it almost feels like I don't know if passive aggressive is the right way of putting it, but there's just
Yeah,
all
it's
these
like
like little
it's like
lines
do
where
it. Are you going to
yeah,
do it? Like do it. Like we're
yeah.
playing chicken. I don't understand it.
I think with him, the question. So I wrote this piece. I don't know. It's I guess a month ago. It all blends together now. That he reminds me a lot, not in good ways, of Mike Gundy, where just refusing to evolve and adapt. And you had a lot of success. The highs were incredible, and now you're it's getting a little weird. And like he's a program legend, but it's not as fun as it used to be. And there's all these weird comments and press conferences, and just it reminds me a lot of Gundy. And I think clearly he's going to have to make changes. I mean, it's just that defense is a mess. I mean, they went out and made a very expensive hire in getting Tom Allen from Penn State. It has not worked. I don't know if that's where it begins and ends, but you feel like you have to make changes. And is he willing to evolve his roster building structure? To this point, he has not been. And at a certain point, I mean, it is like the definition of insanity. Like if you keep doing the exact same thing, I don't know why we expect any different results. And like, I was admittedly hoodwinked by this team. I thought they were going to be good this year. Like they had a lot of returning talent, a lot of it like NFL caliber talent. Like I was like, this team is going to be a playoff team. I really believed that. I was clearly very, very wrong. And they're losing a lot of that talent. Like their roster is worse on paper next year. And so does he do the I'm all in NIL transfer portal move the way we've seen other coaches who've had their kind of backs against the wall? Or does he just keep doing what he's been doing, which we're seeing diminishing returns every single year? He's got to do something. And I have a lot of respect for Clemson's AD, Graham Neff. I think he's an innovative guy. I don't think he's just going to accept a downward spiral. So I would imagine there have to be some tough conversations at the end of the year, like how are we getting this thing back on track? But it's hard for me to see how he does it at this point. It just feels like it's getting worse and worse.
If that were to happen, if that job were to come open, where would it rank? Florida, LSU, Auburn. I mean, it's an interesting job. It's kind of like a niche pocket job, right? But I feel like it has so much potential if you get the right guy in there, or really kind of similar to what Dabo used to be. Like where does Clemson kind of fall on the hierarchy in terms of where you see coaches really kind of seeing the job?
Well, the joke is always that it's Auburn with a lake, right? There's just a lot of similarities between Auburn and Clemson. So I would, this is so great. This is admittedly just like me just off the top of my head. I haven't like texted anybody thinking about like, hey, how would you rank these jobs? But I'd probably slot it maybe slightly above Auburn, but behind the others. I think that there's two different ways of looking at things. I think like one, the ACC is just more wide open than the SEC, right? And so, like, the path is there. I mean, look, the ACC might be a one bid league this year. So if you get it rolling at Clemson, as we saw with Dabo, like, you can make the playoff potentially every year. So to me, that would be very attractive and why I'd probably slot it above. Now, the flip side, and this has come up a little bit, some agents and industry sources that I've talked to about Virginia Tech, is that if you believe in the big picture doomsday, the ACC is going to die one day and we're going to have a super league, you'd probably rather be in the SEC and Big Ten to secure your spot than being at Virginia Tech. Or, I mean, I think Clemson still finds a spot as well, but like, there's certain programs where if we break it down to one big league, they're probably not getting the invite. And so that's something that came up for me. I don't know how many coaches are thinking about that, but that's something that people have brought up to me about, hey, keep this in mind at Virginia Tech when you think about where jobs rank. So I'll apply the same standard to Clemson, but we've seen Dabo win multiple national championships there. I've been to games there. Like, it is an incredible environment. It's a passionate fan base. It's a good school. You can recruit. It's in a pretty good recruiting area. So I think that there's plenty of things to be excited about it. But it is. I don't know. I'm trying to think of where. I guess I'd put it top 15, top 20. I don't know. At a certain point, I'm going to have like too many top 20 jobs. So I haven't like figured it out in my head. But
Right. Well, it is one of the better jobs in the country. I think the question is do they still have that hunger to compete and win national championships? And the obvious answer to that, if you're a fan of Clemson, would be yes. But like, the times have changed from the way that Dabo raised and developed the program to where we are today and what you must do in order to keep up with the Joneses of college football. So I think there would be a little bit of an adjustment period there. All right, John, we have about 15 minutes left. I kind of want to do kind of rapid fire here because there are a lot of other jobs open. Um, what does Arkansas do? I mean, they're just kind of a forgotten man here, and I think they got an appetite for winning. I think they can get behind their football coach if they get the right guy. I think they're kind of in a unique, advantageous situation because the expectations are so low that they have the freedom and flexibility to go out there and really kind of make a creative hire without getting the criticism that a top tier school in their conference would get.
yeah, I mean, I think if I'm Arkansas, I'm thinking, man, I probably should have fired Sam Pittman last year, and been like the top job that came open. I think that they, unfortunately, are getting kind of pushed down the line. But I mean, they're the ones that, again, I think I would use as my example, as I was talking about earlier. Like, if you're Arkansas, and, I thought Bobby P had a shot. They keep losing, so I don't think that he is going to be the guy. I thought if he won a few games down the stretch, he would have a real shot. I think that has faded. But for instance, if you're Arkansas and you decide, you know what, I am all in on Ryan Silverfield at Memphis, do I just, as soon as the season ends, just go out and get him? Now, he's another guy who could be in the playoffs, so all these things have caveats, but a Ryan Silverfield and Alex Golich at South Florida, do I just go hard and aggressive at getting one of those guys before they pop up in other coaching searches? That's something that I would strongly consider. I mean, I think a guy like Barry Odom has connections to that place. Eli Drinkwitz has connections to that place. I don't think Drinkwitz leaves Missouri for Arkansas at this stage of his career, but there are ties there. I think there was a hope that Rhett Lashley might decide to come on home. And of course, that seems to be off the table now with the contract he just signed. So I think it's a pretty good job. It's like you said, you have to sell them on the advantage to being at Arkansas. I will say that we'll see with this search whether things have changed a little bit. And I think certainly when they hired John Calipari, it did from a basketball standpoint. But having known people who have worked over at Arkansas at a pretty high level, they've told me, like, the money that you think we have is not what we actually have. Everybody thinks we have all this Walmart money, and like, Walmart gives to the school. They're not giving to our athletic department the way that you think they are. So there's almost been this thing of like, man, Arkansas has more money than anybody. It's like there's a lot of money in Arkansas, but it's not necessarily coming through NIL and coming through the programs. John Tyson of Tyson Chicken stepped up in basketball. I think he played a role in John Calipari coming. So if they've hit a low enough bottom here, are those guys willing to kick in money? I think that could change the type of caliber candidate that you get. But historically, they have not actually done that.
What about Eric Morris, North Texas?
I think he's going to have multiple options. I mean, I think if you're Oklahoma State, you'd love to have Eric Morris, and I think he's a name there. I think he makes a lot of sense, and I think where Eric Morris has a lot of potential value, and I think one of the things that you're going to see this cycle, it's already happening with coordinators. I think you might see it with head coaches, and Eric Morris would be a good example of like, I'll bring my QB with me, right? And like that, I think gives you that baseline of like, I'm really good and I'm bringing a QB who can win right away. Like, we'll get this thing rolling fast and we'll get momentum going early. And like, you're going to see, I think, offensive coordinators and others being like, if you hire me, I bring the QB too. And that's a package deal. I've already heard of people kind of packaging themselves for potential jobs. So I think that would be attractive if he can bring the QB with him and like, hey, we'll get this thing rolling pretty good, pretty early on. And he's clearly done a very good job. And he's, there's a bucket to me of American coaches, and it's him, it's Golish, Silverfield, Summerall. They're kind of the top four in my mind, but you've got others. I mean, Jeff Traylor is always kind of kicking around and just had a big win over Tulane. Could see him in the mix for Oklahoma State, jobs like that. But Morris is going to have an opportunity this year for sure.
The mess to maker kid's legit, man.
He is.
It's a ton of fun.
Yeah. And so it's like, there are going to be big programs who are going to want him regardless. And you know better than I do, so I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's like there are certain programs that have made a living on trying to go out and get the top portal QB. And like I have already heard that he is a name that people feel very highly about, and there will be some competitive, I think, competitive offers, I think, for him if he's willing to move, whether that's maybe with his head coach or elsewhere.
All right, two other programs I want to hit on. Penn State and Virginia Tech. I think they're kind of tied to each other geographically. Penn State, I kind of put in that same bucket at LSU in Florida. Like, they fired James Franklin. They're one of the first teams that has a vacancy available. All of a sudden you look around, Matt Rule's the name, signs an extension. And now it's like, now what, right? If you can't get a guy like Elko, what does it look like? I mean, does it end up being like Manny Diaz? Is that a good enough name for Penn State's fan base? Like, where are they at right now?
I think that's a really great question. And I think as it stands right now, they might be the one I'm a little worried about if I'm a Penn State fan, just because of the other jobs that have opened up that might make more geographic sense for some of these, top candidates. So if you kind of run down the list, I think Jeff Brom's an incredible coach. I think he's really, really good. And if I'm Penn State, I'm certainly interested in him. I mean, this dude, what do you win, 8-9 games at Purdue? Like that's really hard. He's got Louisville in a great spot. But as you mentioned earlier, like that's home for him. I think he's got what, 2 or 3 brothers, I think, working for him. He's got a son there. He just got Vince Marrow to leave Kentucky finally to join him at Louisville. Like he's got a really good thing going. They have money. Like, is he truly movable, or is he like, I'd rather just be in Louisville? That's a tough one to figure out. Same thing with Elko. Like Elko's highly paid. He's got a top 3 team in the country right now. They're going to make the playoff. Like, is he really movable? It's a question. Like Clark Lee has a really good thing going at Vandy, and everything I hear is like he loves being in Nashville. He's not looking to leave Nashville. And also, are you willing to hire a Vandy coach again if you're Penn State? I think that's a real question. I don't know if that's the right fit. And then you get to Manny Diaz, and like, yeah, there's a connection there, obviously, between the AD and Manny. I think Manny's a really good coach. I spent some time with Manny this spring in his office, and I think he gets it. I think he can recruit. I think that there's a lot to like about him, and maybe like kind of you're saying earlier, people just have to realize like the game's change, and you got to just try to find good coaches and give them resources and hope for the best. And I think Manny would fit all of that. Like, can he bring Darian Mensah with him? Like, Mensah was lighting it up against Clemson the other day. That kid's pretty good. That would make me feel a little bit better too. But on paper, you just paid $50 million to get rid of James Franklin, who took you to the national semifinal last year. And you'd be hiring a coach who has not even sniffed that level of success. Now, that might not be fair, but if we're playing just the resume game, Manny doesn't have anywhere close to the resume that James Franklin had. And it's not like he hasn't been at a big program. He was at Miami. Now, there's a lot that happened there, but still. So I think that would be a little bit of a hard sell, frankly, to that fan base. I like Manny. I think Manny could have a lot of success at Penn State. I just think that if you were to go down that path, you have to accept, and I think frankly more ADs should do this. You have to accept I'm not winning the press conference. I'm probably going to take some heat early on. And I think why you see ADs make a lot of the same kind of hires is that if you're Auburn's AD, John Cohen, who's about to get another hire here, if you hire Hugh Freeze and it fails, everyone's like, yeah, I mean, Hugh Freeze made sense. It didn't work. I don't know why, but you hired the best guy we thought available. If you go outside the box, or again, if you fire James Franklin to hire him for a Manny Diaz, if that hire doesn't work, you're probably losing your job, right? And so I think a lot of times you just see ADs act out of, you know, self job security of like,
Logic. Right.
yeah, I'll just like
Right.
I'll just hit one down the midway and it'll be good enough, hopefully, and then I won't lose my job because everyone can say, hey, that hire made sense. Versus let me go outside the box, and then if it doesn't work, I'm going to get fired probably. And I've seen that happen at Auburn too. I saw Alan Green hire Brian Harsin, and they both got fired. So that's what happens sometimes when you hire somebody outside the box.
Right. It's like, trying to make the club choice off the tee, Am I hitting the driver or am I hitting the 4-iron, A lot of
Right,
people
yeah.
hit the driver. I struggle with the driver, but that's neither here nor there. All right,
You might spray it,
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Virginia Tech. Real quick. Doesn't need to be long. Like, what do you think? One or two options here. Where are they looking?
James Franklin's, I feel like, a name that's gotten a lot of buzz. I think this time of year you have to always be skeptical of everything you hear, right? And so I couldn't tell you, excuse me, I can't tell you definitively, is this a let's get the James Franklin Virginia Tech buzz going so that these other schools that are coming open know that they're going to have to move fast on me, or is there legitimate interest? Like before he even got fired, I wrote something about how James Franklin should just think about leaving Penn State for Virginia Tech because he'll be happier there. And so I actually think Virginia Tech's like a perfect job for James Franklin in some ways. Like he is a great floor guy, right? And Virginia Tech has suffered a lot, and like they need the floor to be elevated. I think James Franklin can do that at Virginia Tech. The question that I think you have to think about are, one, I mean, they just hired a James Franklin guy, right? And Brent Pry, it didn't work. Do you want to go down the same path? They're different guys, but still, you just hired one of his guys from Penn State. And I think two, real quick, and I was talking to an AD about this, is like, do you want to hire a guy who just got a huge buyout and is kind of coming down a level? Or do you want to hire a guy on the way up? So he has a duty to mitigate. We don't need to get in the weeds on it, but in theory, he's getting a lot of money that he doesn't have to work, right? In some ways. Do I want that guy who's made tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in his career? Or do I want a Bob Chesney at James Madison who's making good money relative to the average American, but he's not making tens of millions, right? Like that dude might be really hungry and might be very willing to take a highly incentivized contract where we'll give you a couple million and then we'll stack on 6 wins, you get this, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's just, I think you have to figure out what road you want to go. But those are two of the names that I think are getting some juice. And I think whatever path they want to go, both of them could potentially make sense for Virginia Tech.
Yeah, opposite ends of the spectrum too, which I think you need a variety of candidates that kind of offer different things, right, in terms of where they are in their career. All right, last question I want to ask you, is there a name or two or three or four out there that you think like, hey, I kind of got my eyes on this particular individual over the next couple of weeks, maybe a surprise, and if they don't win out here or if things don't shake in their favor, that could be another job or two that ends up opening up.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I think, multiple jobs that you have to kind of keep an eye on. I think everything from Florida State's very obvious, right? We've seen kind of that bubble up to a Baylor, to a Maryland, to I'm trying to think of some other. I mean, there's just quite a few.
Kentucky?
I mean, there's also. I think Kentucky is one where you would love to not have to do it. I think them beating Auburn helps that. He has one of the best contracts I think that Jimmy Sexton has ever done for a client, where he is owed $38 million within 60 days of them firing him. That's a lot of money to have to stroke. Here's the other thing that I think, and some of these, I was hearing this for months, and it's starting to bubble up a lot, but there's multiple guys who I think, and I'll use the situation at NC State, for instance. There's multiple ones where it's, could a guy retire at the end of the year? That opens up other jobs where it's not a firing. It's just like, I've had enough. And Dave Doran's one that I think, he's had to address it. I think recently it's starting to really bubble up, but that one was kind of bubbling beneath the surface for a few weeks of like, hey, keep an eye on this one. So I wouldn't be surprised if there were a couple retirement type deals as well, which would open up even more jobs. So I think we have potential for multiple more jobs to open up. But I think where things stand right now, you are seeing some programs scared of jumping into the fray, even before Auburn. Like Auburn had to get in. Like you lose to Kentucky, you literally have fans staying after the game just to boo and yell, "Fire Hugh Freeze!" Like there's no coming back from that. But Kentucky, Maryland, Florida State, some of these others, like I think you'd love to just can my guy just win a couple games down the stretch so I don't have to deal with this. And Mike Norvell did what he had to do on Saturday, blow out Wake Forest. Let's get some momentum down the stretch so we just can kick this can down the road for at least a year. Because I don't think you want to get in this cycle unless you absolutely have to.
No, not at all. Not the cycle that you want to be in. All right, John, leave us with this one big prediction if you have one. Just put it on us. Is there one thing out there that you can say, oh, keep an eye on that, or I heard this, I heard that.
That's
Putting you on the spot,
question.
buddy.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of something good. I don't know. I don't know that I have anything great right now.
Any Gruden rumors or anything like that?
Gruden would be interesting. I think that one would be an interesting idea. I do think. I wonder, and it's in my backyard. I wonder, like with UAB not having success of Trent Dilfer, whether that scares people. Here's one that we haven't mentioned, and I don't want to. We could talk about this guy for a while, so I'll just make it fast. Like keep an eye on Dion. I think that's one that is worth watching. That's trending.
Would that be more of a medical thing?
I think, more of a, let me take a step back. That's certainly where the speculation has been. He's trying to combat that, but like at a certain point, it's like people already wondered, like, are you going to be as into this once your kids leave? And so it's like you're having very, very real health concerns. Like that would be a reason enough to never want to coach again. You've made plenty of money. Things aren't really going great right now. Like at a certain point, you're like, hey man, I had success as a college coach. I can just focus on my health. That's one that I would watch down the stretch if things keep going the way they are.
Makes sense. I mean, and honestly, like if you're Colorado, you got everything you could possibly imagine from Deion Sanders. I mean, they were bottom of the barrel, right? And you talk about like timelines and elevating programs, getting them back into the national scene. Like the Virginia Tech thing's really real. It's almost like let's adjust our expectations, manage them, understand what we're trying to accomplish over the next 5 years. And if we do that right, then we can take the next step, right? But we can't really, afford any more missteps in the process. John Talty, man, appreciate it as always. We'll probably have you back in a couple of weeks if you want to join us. You're unbelievable, man. And the guy to follow, guys, like I said, you can follow him on X at jtalty. CBSSports.com does an unbelievable job. Him, along with the rest of the insiders over there, Brandon Marcello, Chris Hummer. Who else am I missing over there, John? You got
our guy, Matt Zenitz, man.
Oh, God, Matt's going to be upset that I forgot him. But, we got a host of crew of guys over at CBS Sports doing an unbelievable job, and they're the guys to follow right now with all this coaching search hoopla going around. And then, guys, just a reminder, like and subscribe. Helps keep the show free for us. That's the last thing that you can do. That's all I'm going to ask for you. So, guys, I appreciate it. Hope you have a great rest of your Monday. We'll see you next time.